Good evening. Thank you. Welcome and good evening. On behalf of the Geneva Graduate Institute, we welcome the International Gender Champions Network to join us this evening in marking International Women's Day 2023, with an event that raises awareness of matters of gender equality and international affairs through the art of debate. My name is Claire Somerville. I'm the Executive Director of the Gender Centre here at the Graduate Institute, where I teach and I lead on our gender studies research. It's my pleasure to welcome you all on behalf of our Director, Marie-Laure Salles, who is an active member of the International Gender Champions Network and has this year doubled down on commitment to gender equity, both within the Institute and beyond, through our research, teaching, and our public engagement. We thank the IGC for this continued collaboration. As an institute, we actively encourage critical thinking that questions gendered power relations and their structural and ideological inscriptions. Our own efforts have been recently galvanised through our Gender Diversity and Inclusion Initiative, where we've collectively co-created an approach to GDI to reflect our values and our work as a community. We are delighted that one of our community, Cecilia Radera, a student in international relations specialising in global security and gender, will participate this evening as one of the debaters. Thank you. I'm going to shortly hand over to our moderator, but before I do, we have a message from Margot Wallström, who of course made headlines around the world in 2014 in Sweden by introducing the first feminist foreign policy, which of course is the topic of our debate this evening. So by way of a few words of introduction, in case you don't know who Margot Wallström is, she was elected to the Swedish Parliament in 1979 and held several ministerial positions over the following 20 years. She became European Commissioner for the Environment and then Vice President of the European Commission until 2010. She served as Minister of Foreign Affairs of Sweden during the time when she launched their feminist foreign policy. So we now have a short video message from her to kick us off this evening.
Dear gender champions in Geneva and elsewhere, first of all, thank you so much for your hard work and thank you for inviting me. I wish I was there in person, but I'm afraid you will have to do with a digital version of myself today. And after all, attention is a great sign of human generosity. This particular International Women's Day, I think, is the perfect timing for a debate about the best ways to enhance gender equality. And what has happened recently in Afghanistan and Iran is an illustration of the discrimination against women around the world, and in particular in those two countries, but also an expression of their resolve and their strength and their will to be seen not as victims and survivors only, but as actors for change. I've been asked to say something about my experience from introducing a feminist foreign policy. And I must say that its origin is very much my experience as the first special representative of the UN's Secretary General on conflict-related sexual violence. And what happened was that practically every day I learned that the UN system receives news reports from the field similar to this one. This morning, an 11-year-old girl from Gereda, South Darfur, was raped by 2 armed men. The mother of the victim told Radio Dabanga that she was collecting firewood with her daughter when the armed men attacked her. She rushed to the displaced camp in Gereda to ask for help. As camp residents found the girl, the perpetrators had already fled the scene. the victim is severely injured and transferred to Greda Hospital. Now, it's a story of one single girl, but it reflects the very reality of war that so many, particularly women, face. And targeting women in particular means targeting the backbone of society, as women often bear the primary responsibility for the family. Conflict-related sexual violence affects not only the individual, but the family, the village, and the whole construction of society. It tears societies apart and creates incentives for revenge. So some of these experiences I carried with me when I was appointed foreign minister in Sweden. And I announced that the Swedish government and me, I as a foreign minister, would pursue a feminist foreign policy. So why did I choose such a controversial expression? I of course knew and understood that there will be strong reactions to using that word. Well, for three reasons. First of all, because it creates curiosity, and that is something that I immediately noticed. It gives a chance to define feminism as being women and men enjoying the same rights, obligations, and opportunities in life. But it also leads to accountability. If you create an action plan, then people will refer to that and say, so why haven't you done this? Why not that? And of course, there were both positive and critical reactions to it. But over time, I would say that it has taken root and it has spread so that now there are more than 10 other countries who have also announced that they will pursue a feminist foreign policy. And with the content of making sure that women and men can enjoy the same rights, legal and human rights, and that they can, that women are represented, that they are at the table where peace agreements are being signed, negotiated and signed, and also that resources in budgets also go to meet the needs of women and girls. And I see that there is an evolution of a feminist foreign policy where these countries can also demonstrate to the world that they are interested in making sure that women are at the table, that they can use the networks of women negotiators and mediators, that they can show that more women means more peace in the world. That's why it belongs to foreign policy. And I would say to you, as I've said often to the new young diplomats in the foreign service, that you need two things also for the future. You need courage. You need to be courageous. You need to follow your inner compass to what is right and what is wrong. And you need some patience, not too much, since we know that the world is in peril and we have to do so much more together. I wish you all the best for the important debate that you will engage in, and I hope to see you in the fight for women's rights also in the future. And what is right and good for women and children is good for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So we thank Margot Wallström for these words, these opening remarks that really help set the background and frame the debate that's going to take place this evening. So with no further ado, I'm going to introduce our moderator, Darius Farman, who is co-director of the Swiss think tank for us, and he will then proceed with the debate and welcome the debaters to the stage. So thank you very much on behalf of the Graduate Institute.
Thank you, Claire. Distinguished participants, most honorable guests, good evening and a warm welcome to the fourth Geneva Gender Debate. As just announced, my name is Darius Farman. I'm the co-director of Forhaus, the Swiss grassroots think tank on foreign policy. And besides, I had the immense privilege of becoming this year soon an international gender champion. So you may now ask, what exactly are those international gender champions? Superheroes? Huh? Possibly. Role models? For sure. The international gender champions are decision makers from international organizations, from governments, from civil society, determined to make gender equality a working and a truly to make gender equality, a working and a true reality in their environment, and induce structural change through core pledges, 2 of them actually, so women representation and no gender-based violence, as well as annual pledges. There are worldwide 6 IGC hubs in most global cities, such as Nairobi, Paris, Vienna, New York, The Hague. Special big up to The Hague. I heard that they are tonight retransmitting actually the debate taking place here. And the 6th, but last and not least, of course, Geneva here together with you tonight. What's on the menu now of this 4th gender debate? We want to embark with you, with our speakers, on a nuanced and on a profound debate around the concept of feminist foreign policy, the very concept that was just as well presented now in Margot's video. But before just jumping in, let's just be extremely clear from the onset. If we are together tonight here, it's not to argue for or against gender equality. I think what we want to offer you tonight for International Women's Day 2023 is something else. We don't want to, again, promote female-only discounts on clothing or makeup. We don't want to share feel-good catchphrases on how important gender equality is, because that will be really, truly groundbreaking, isn't it? So no, rather tonight what we want to do is really to encourage a bit of an insightful conversation rather on the way there, on the best way forward to make the world more gender equal, and maybe put in other terms, in the UN terms, basically how do we make SDG 5, the SDG on gender equality, a living reality. So, for this conversation tonight, and also to offer you a bit something different, we wanted to follow the Oxford-style debate rules. This format requires debaters to take position on a given motion. It typically involves 2 teams of debaters, one in favor of this motion and one against it. Roles are assigned in advance. That's a good thing to know. It's a good point in the sense that speakers will present a position that do not necessarily reflect their personal or their professional beliefs. One after the other, the 2 teams will deliver statements, arguments, counter-arguments before we open the floor to the audience for Q&A, and then back for a grand finale to the speakers to finish on this. Before introducing and calling our debaters here, just maybe one small remark about the voting system that is part of the Oxford-style debate. So we will have an opening vote and a final vote. And with the vote, the goal is really for you, from the audience, to actually position yourself on this motion here in favor or against it. To do that, we will use the tool called Slido. You see it here. You can just go on slido.com on your smartphone or your tablet, or just use the QR code as well. Enter this code, and you'll just then access the page on which you can actually vote in favor or against the motion. So let's just do this now. It can take a few minutes. All good. Exactly, first results start to appear. Is there anyone for whom this is not working, or who has issues? Might need some help? Looks good so far. Okay, interesting results. No ballot cramming, please. Vote once only. All good. You can continue voting. I think we had a good picture of where the room tonight stands. And we'll see now actually if the debaters, and I see especially maybe the team against the motion, which has a bit of a pressure, will manage to sway your opinion or make you change it, or at least we consider it. You can still vote, but I will just proceed now directly with the presentation of our different speakers. I will introduce our debaters one after the other. First, starting with Ambassador Marc Bichler, whom I would like to introduce here on the stage. A round of applause, please, for Marc Bichler. Marc Bichler is the permanent representative of Luxembourg in the Office of the United Nations and other international organizations in Geneva. And among many other things, he is a lawyer by training, but he is also an international gender champion. Thank you for being with us tonight. Now I would like to welcome Ambassador Claudia Fuentes Julio. A round of applause as well. Thank you. She is the ambassador and permanent representative of Chile to the United Nations and other international organizations in Geneva, and among many other things, a social scientist by training, but also an international gender champion. And now I will introduce the team against the motion. We had the two debaters in favor of the motion, starting first with Cecilia Rieder. Cecilia Riederer is a master's student here at the Geneva Graduate Institute. She's specialized in global security and gender, and she's involved, besides super intensive studies, as well in several volunteer organizations as an intersectional feminist activist. Welcome. Finally, I would like to welcome Jagan Chapagain. Jagan Chapagain, thank you. You can come. You can join us. You are the CEO and Secretary General of the IFRC, the International Federation of Red Cross and the Red Crescent Societies, and among many other things as well, an engineer by training, and you are also an international gender champion. Welcome. Now, without any further ado, you will directly jump into the debate. The debate has formally started. And we will first begin with opening statements from each team. One person from each team will deliver a 2-minute opening statement, starting with the side in favor of the motion. An important feature, we also discussed it shortly before, of the Oxford-style debate is the timekeeping. So I will really also insist tonight that we'll keep an eye on the time and we'll be thankful for our speakers to do as well. So starting now with the pro team, I would like to give the floor and exactly the floor to Ambassador Marc Bichler for the pro position of the motion. Exactly, you can use the mic there.
Thank you, Darius. First of all, maybe allow me to wish everybody a happy and a meaningful International Women's Day. Debaters are, when they are trained, they're normally told that they should start with a joke or personal story. I opt for the personal story, just to say that I'm all the more dedicated to the cause of the eradication of all gender-based human rights violations. That March 8th is coincidentally also my wife's birthday. So since she may watch from Luxembourg, happy birthday, darling. Okay, the motion to be discussed. Let's get into the substance. This House believes that countries which prioritize gender equality should adopt a feminist foreign policy. Now, as a preliminary remark, maybe allow me a disclaimer. I'm a lawyer by training, so I have to do that. I'm not here to teach any lessons and not to engage in any proselytizing exercises. And as a matter of fact, in my view, promoting a feminist foreign policy is not a matter of belief. It is more a cross-sectoral horizontal approach than a question of prioritizing. And I'm sure it cannot be imposed on anybody if he or she is not convinced by it. And in that spirit, I welcome the exchange of ideas of tonight, and I would really like also to thank the organizers for having me as a part in this round of discussion. And I dare say that no one has, as of yet, got the definition of a feminist foreign policy completely right. Maybe Margot got it right, but, well, we stand to learn from her, and I think we stand also to learn from each other tonight. So let me share with you the observations and reflections that brought the Luxembourg government to adopting a feminist foreign policy, a worthy cause, and, to be honest, still work in progress. So in my remarks later on, I would like to make, first and foremost, 2 points. I will expand on those later on for the good management of the time. The first point I would like to make is that a feminist foreign policy goes really at the roots of systemic inequalities. It fights systemic inequalities. And the second idea would be that a feminist foreign policy ensures the full participation and representation of women at all levels of decision-making. Now, in order to round off my opening remarks, maybe just a few provocative remarks to the other team. A feminist foreign policy is more than a nice to have. A feminist foreign policy is not pinkwashing. A feminist foreign policy is not a label. And a feminist foreign policy is not about taking anything away from men. Then one last question, just to get into the mood. In a game of chess, would you consider forfeiting your queen right from the start? If not, why would you do that in foreign policy for the sake of peace, security, development, and human rights? I thank you.
Thank you, for the proposition. And now for the contraposition, I would like to invite Cecilia Riederer on the lectern.
Well, at least maybe I'll do a better job at keeping the time, but otherwise, good evening.
This was provocative.
Yes, yes. Good evening. I would like to open with a quote from Audre Lorde, who said, "It is a particular academic arrogance to assume any discussion about feminist theory without examining our many differences and without a significant input from poor women, Black and third world women, and lesbians. And I would add, input from disabled and queer people." The setting of this debate, at the very heart of the Geneva bubble, about the idea of a feminist foreign policy, showcases, in my opinion, a similar arrogance and indeed the inherent problem of it. States which prioritize gender equality should not adopt a feminist foreign policy, because we first must have an honest, truly inclusive, bottom-up and intersectional dialogue about the concept, its origins, and inherent biases before we advocate for its universal adoption. As long as feminist foreign policy is a concept designed from a position of privilege, shaped only by those in power, it can never be truly feminist. Because our understanding of intersectional feminism requires inclusive debates that prioritize those at the margins and local lived realities. If we don't do this, if we stick to the current conceptualization of feminist foreign policy, we do not revolutionize our foreign policy, but instead we reiterate neo-colonial, racial, and patriarchal power hierarchies, and we further essentialize a homogeneous category of women. It would not revolutionize foreign policy or our societies at large, but instead it would contribute to the very patriarchy we seek to destroy. To return to Audre Lorde, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. Therefore, we call for a reimagination of feminist foreign policy that goes beyond the master's tools, beyond the privilege and arrogance, and instead yields the intersectional feminist power that lies in the margins, in a community that draws strength from its diversity and difference. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Now, after some very energetic opening statements, we'll now move to the phase of the arguments. And each debater will have, in turn, 4 minutes to expand and elaborate on their arguments. And I would like to invite you, Ambassador.
I have 4 or 2 minutes?
You have 4 minutes now. Exactly. Invite you, exactly. Yes. For the pro-motion.
Okay. Thank you so much. It is actually a real pleasure to be here today, commemorating the 8th of March, actually in a debate about feminism and feminist foreign policy. So, not to lose my minutes, let me start in order to tell you a little bit more why it is important to defend this statement. I will tell you a little bit more about why Chile is decided to have a feminist foreign policy, and what are the consequences, have been the consequence of actually having that policy in place. So the new Chilean government assumed this year, and the president decided and said that he wanted to have a feminist government, which means, of course, including foreign policy. Foreign policy has been a realm that in Chile has been very, let me say, isolated, actually, from the developments of other states' policy promoting gender. Foreign policy and defense policy in general had remained pretty much in their own realm without being able to be open, you know, to debates about gender equality, to also to stimulate also gender representation even inside the ministry. So this was actually an opportunity to start doing that. So let me elaborate a couple of things that I have seen since we decided to have in March last year this idea of gender foreign policy. First, it opened a space for dialogue that we didn't have before. Without this label of feminist foreign policy, there was very little space for dialogue. Dialogue that, as you all know, is very much needed because there is very little dialogue internationally and also nationally. The dialogue opened to different sectors in society. Diplomats finally were open to dialogue. As you know, diplomats sometimes tend to be a little bit more reactionary than other sectors in the state. Also, this dialogue was promoting with civil society organizations and scholars. That was actually a consequence of having a feminist foreign policy. Frameworks. We finally were discussing about frameworks. What does it mean to have a feminist foreign policy? The very creation of that label helped us to discuss, do we need some principles when it comes to the promotion of gender equalities? What kind of principles? Do we need objectives, particular objectives? How are the government is going to be accountable for that? So once again, creation of a framework. Let me say that in general, we're still discussing about this, and this is an ongoing discussion. It's not an easy discussion. We believe that when discussing about feminist foreign policy, it has to be flexible, it has to be inclusive. Here it was mentioned before that this sometimes is a view from the north, or is a view only coming from the privilege. Let me say that Chile in general is a very humble country. If anything, we are not pretentious internationally. We are quite humble. We do have a principled foreign policy, but we are not a country that is showing off. On the contrary, we are a country that we believe in dialogue, and we believe in that we can build bridges actually with other countries as well. And that is one of our principles behind our foreign policy, quite the contrary of what my predecessor was saying. So that's framework. Then also I think it signals urgency. Having the label of feminist foreign policy, it actually states pretty clearly that this is an urgent matter. This is a matter that cannot wait. We are talking about 50% of our society here that have been traditionally been left behind, traditionally been discriminated. Also, feminist foreign policy is not about women's rights. Of course, it's about that, but it's also in general, at least at how my country and other countries are framing it, it's about groups that have been traditionally excluded from policies. Also, the promotion of LGBTQ+ people. Also the promotion of indigenous and indigenous women, and so on. So that, I believe, it's the inclusion of other groups and signing urgency. Finally, I have many other points, but let me just finish with accountability. I think having a feminist foreign policy also means that citizens can hold their countries and their states and their governments accountable. That's very important, because finally we will be able to say, Mr. Ambassador, why we do not have, are we presenting someone, a woman, for this position, when we do have so many women that can actually take the most important positions in power internationally, and we can actually say that in their face and tell them, my government is promoting representation, equity, if I may say, parity. We can be held accountable for that.
Thank you very much, Claudia, Fuentes, Julio. Thank you very much. And now on the side of the contra, the last debater we haven't heard yet tonight, I would like to invite Jagan, Chapagain to come and present the contra side.
Thank you so much. I think the organizers somehow put Marc and me on the opposing side, so I hope my invitation to visit Luxembourg will not be withdrawn after this debate. So let's see how it goes. So thank you so much for having me here. As mentioned earlier, I think today's debate is not about challenging the feminism. It's also not about challenging the gender equality. Actually, we absolutely believe in gender equality, and we absolutely believe on feminism. Today's debate is about whether the feminine foreign policy is the best vehicle to deliver the gender equality. And of course, I'm also not challenging the intent behind the feminine foreign policy. But intent alone is not enough to find the solutions. As the saying goes, the road to hell is paved with good intentions if it is not followed by right actions. So why I'm speaking against the motion today is the feminine foreign policy fundamentally goes against the two current trends that exist in the world. And the first one is the trend about localization. The localization that we build policies listening to the people and the communities at the homes, people who are marginalized, people who are excluded. That's where we need to listen to. And the feminine foreign policy that is developed in the capitals, I'm sorry, Ambassador, even if it is a Chilean capital, a humble country, it doesn't reflect the voices and the lived realities of the people in the community. So it fundamentally doesn't reflect the notion of localization, which is the need of the today. Localization is about self-determination, and anything less fails to truly be feminist. The second aspect I would like to talk about is the feminist foreign policy fundamentally goes against today's debate on decolonization. Let us be very honest about the history. I come from Nepal. Nepal was never colonized. But I studied in India, and I see the scars of colonization even after 75 years of independence. So the notion that we will develop a certain foreign policy to design our relationship with certain countries reminds those very painful memories of the colonization. And at times, it can actually be very counterproductive to what the feminist policy actually wants to achieve. So it can actually disrupt that power balance that exists roughly between the global north and global south. It's not quite like that now. It has changed a lot. But it's extremely important if we don't consider this aspect of decolonization, it can actually be counterproductive, and it can actually go against feminism.
And the final point I want to highlight here, and I think my partner already talked about it, there is also this preconceived notion of homogeneous experience about the feminism or the gender inequality or the oppression by the women. That's not the case. I have worked in the Red Cross, I have gone to the villages, I lived in, and I come from South Asia. There is no homogeneity about the oppression. It's very unique. Individuals have their own experiences. And it's impossible to develop a framework or principles in the capital as part of the foreign policy to address the need of that individualness. I don't know whether that's the right English word or not. But that individualness is extremely important. And this type of preconceived notion of a feminine foreign policy do not address that individual lived reality. So that's why I'm speaking against this motion. And of course, I will continue on this later on. Thank you so much.
Very much on time, congratulations. And now, for the third argument, I would like to invite Ambassador Bichler back to the parlor.
Thank you, and thank you for all the very convincing, almost convincing arguments that I will try to rebut. But first of all, I promised you to expand on two ideas. So the first one being that the feminist foreign policy really goes at the roots of systemic inequalities, and that's why we plead for a feminist foreign policy. Foreign policy is a field whose structures are particularly strongly male-dominated and therefore privileges the perspectives, ideas, and experiences of men. We have, of course, to admit that. Now, in a world with an asymmetrical gender order, men and women's experiences diverge. A mere gender-neutral foreign policy would not do the trick because it would fail to take adequate account of these different gender-specific perspectives. So far from being neutral, a foreign policy which is not feminist, therefore cements, as a matter of fact, the status quo. The second point that I wanted to make is that the feminist foreign policy ensures the full participation and representation of women in all levels of decision-making, and two types of arguments can be made in that regard. First one is a rights approach, a rights-based approach. Women deserve, no, they are entitled to be included in the name of principles of gender equality, anti-discrimination, and the universality of human rights. And others, more politically astute than myself, have said it before: human rights are women's rights, and women's rights are human rights once and for all, and I should add, everywhere. So these principles should be well accepted today as we commemorate the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. The instrumental approach and the instrumental argument for the full participation and representation of women at all decision levels can be illustrated, for example, by the Women and Peace Security Agenda that is based on the UN Security Council's Resolution 1325, as we all know, from 2000. And just as a piece of illustration, analysis of 40 peace processes since the end of the Cold War shows that in cases where women were able to exercise a strong influence on the negotiation process, there was a much higher chance that an agreement would be reached than when women would have been excluded from these processes. The same is true also in the field of development, where it has been proven that improving women's access to production factors such as agriculture, agricultural land, or financial services has an incomparably stronger positive effect on hunger and poverty than if access is only granted to men. Now, if I may, just as an answer to the arguments that the other team tried to make, I would like to add that on the topic of the concept of feminism, the Western liberal current of feminism today acknowledges that power relations between men and women, as well as the unequal distribution of rights, privileges, resources, and opportunities are not natural, but socially constructed. This new approach deconstructs the supposedly natural power structure and makes them visible and show that they are not preordained. So I think that we come closer to each other in, in admitting that. It's not only about women, also today queer feminist positions moreover seek to overcome the principles of heteronormativity, as we call it, according to which heterosexuality is the overriding norm, or would be the overriding norm in society, and the gender binary, which only acknowledges of only two distinct genders, male and female, as social ordering principles. An inclusive understanding of feminism, and the same term was used by the other team, for reproducing racist and colonial ideas and structures have led also to the emergence of feminist positions opposing all types of discrimination and oppression based on sex, gender, sexual orientation, skin color, disability, religion, origin, and so far more. So let me finish maybe this round of discussion by insisting that, of course, a feminist foreign policy must have an intersectional approach. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for this very well-structured and insightful presentation. I think by now, I think you understood a bit like the dynamic of it. So now we're gonna hear again the contra side, and I invite again Cecilia Riederer, you have the floor for 4 minutes.
As has been pointed out by my partner, this debate is not about the question if feminist foreign policy is a good concept or not. It is about the question if it is the single best alternative that we have to change, to fundamentally change our ideas of foreign policy and national security. It is not about the question if we are for or against gender equality. It is about what is the best way to achieve it. And we here today, as the side opposition, have embarked on the risky adventure of trying to tell you that maybe feminist foreign policy is not the single best alternative, but that we must look beyond just this one singular concept that is currently dominating the feminist debates in the area of foreign policy. Why? Because we have said that feminist foreign policy is created within a somewhat exclusive privileged circle and does not go far enough in dismantling patriarchal and racial and neocolonial hierarchies across the globe. It does not go far enough to ensure that intersectional feminist voices from local lived experiences are incorporated in our everyday policy making. It also is because, and my partner has briefly already mentioned this, it is because just by the term feminist foreign policy, we risk actually losing a lot of energy and resources in debates with anti-feminist forces which are rallying up all around the globe, which take issue simply with the term feminist. Wouldn't it be more productive if we don't use a term that is so contentious and focus on what we actually are here to do, achieve gender equality and destroy the patriarchy? So, how can anti-feminist voices misuse and abuse the concept of feminist foreign policy? Well, there's one argument, and it actually is a spin on an argument that we've been making, because there are many anti-feminist forces that actually use the argument that it is a Western imperial concept against feminist foreign policy, and therefore say we should not have it. And that is an abuse of that concept because it completely misrepresents the colonial history and the attempt that we're trying to make at changing the fundamental root causes of global discrimination, both in the present and in terms of the past. And is also abused by anti-feminist forces where you can say that states that apply a feminist foreign policy are hypocritical because they have not achieved gender equality at home, which is, of course, again, a very far-fetched argument, but it is something that anti-feminist forces are using around the globe against feminist action and against the most basic actions. And so we say that simply using this term might redirect a lot of necessary energy and resources, that we should rather focus on gender equality and gender transformative action that is based on the local lived experiences of people. So we should understand that feminist foreign policy is not the single way to go, but it is one among many options that we can go, but that we don't have to go. It is not the only singular project that we can employ, because it also does not destroy the very patriarchal concept of foreign and national policy in itself. It does not question the institution, but rather it tries to kind of change it from the inside, which is nice, but it is not what we're here to do. Because let me remind you of the quote that I started with. And you may call me radical here, but I call on everyone to join together and to dismantle the master's house. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will now proceed to the third part of this Oxford-style debate, and that is opening the floor to all questions coming from the audience. We really encourage you to be critical, to feel critical as well, to try as well to nudge a bit our speakers, our debaters, and try to see how solid their position is. Before we start, just very real quickly, as was quickly mentioned in the beginning, the debate tonight is being live streamed. So just be aware that if you ask a question, you'll also appear on the live stream, just for the sake of GDPR transparency. All good. There will be people circulating in the room with mics. Who wanna start and ask a first question? We have about 20 minutes. There's one there. Yes.
Hello, sorry, I was about to leave because I have another gender event. But I wanted to ask one question to the team of Against the Forum. So you mentioned about the need that the feminist foreign policy is not good because it's imposed from the above, and that a true gender equality should come from bottom up. But don't you think maybe that many times there are cultural things that prevent common people, bottom up, to realize the need for change? So if we always leave cultural changes of this magnitude to a bottom-up approach without having from above a leadership that promotes the change, it can take centuries. So I think that that's the purpose of a feminist foreign policy. You need society also to think of a cultural change. What do you think about that?
Yes, so I think that's a very good question. I think the question or the answer to it is actually that it is not true that we have no bottom-up grassroots movements around the world. Rather, it is that we're not making them visible. There are feminist, intersectional, anti-discrimination movements across the world, everywhere. We can see them in every society, but it is a question of how much are they structurally being reduced, and how can we amplify their voices by providing them a platform and by giving them resources to actually spark that change. Because bottom-up processes, of course, can't work when civil society is being hindered, is cracked down on. So we need open and lived civil society, and we need concrete measures that support explicit pro-gender equality civil society and grassroots movements all across the globe. That is the way to go, and that is how a bottom-up approach for cultural change like that can happen.
Thank you. I see another hand here, and then a second hand over there.
Hello, my name is Elise Buckle. I'm also international gender champion and co-founder of She Changes Climate. So I also have a question for the people against. Sorry. I was just thinking of the apartheid regime in South Africa, that there was clearly a foreign policy from many countries around the world with economic pressure on the government to stop the apartheid regime. So don't you think we need the same kind of pressure right now? You know, I'm thinking of Afghanistan, Iran, where there is clearly a backlash on women's rights. Don't you think we need that pressure internationally from foreign policy to respect these basic human rights?
I think we need to think it in much more comprehensive manner. I think if you are saying that the change in South Africa came from international pressure, I think I will consider that as quite an insult to South Africans and to Nelson Mandela. I think it was fundamentally a South African commitment to bring about the change. The internationals helped. So, but it was deeply rooted in South Africa, and the trust the South Africans had on Nelson Mandela's leadership actually brought about the change. Now, what I will not say is that the internationals cannot help. Internationals absolutely can help. But you can bring about the change in two ways. You can bring about the change by being a partner and nurturing, as my partner said earlier, that these grassroots movements, the grassroots ideas that exist, and you being a partner and you nurture that. And change brought that way is sustainable change. It sustains, it stays. The change that is imposed, you might see, Afghanistan, there was 20 years of intervention. Is Afghanistan any better now? Imposed change is not sustainable. So that's why I think we are not saying there is not a role for a foreign policy, but if the foreign policy comes as a partner, it helps to bring about the change. If it comes as an imposition, it compounds the problem, or if there is a change, it's not sustainable. So that's basically what I would like to say.
Can I say something? Sure.
Okay, thank you. I don't understand why there is this notion that feminist foreign policies are imposed to countries. If someone also can explain that to me as a question first. And let me once again say what's the situation. So the countries that have in place feminist foreign policies, there are some countries from Latin America as well. So we have Chile, Colombia, and Mexico. 3 of them already have said very clearly, and they even have documents, actually quite thick documents, stated their foreign policies, feminist foreign policies. Also, in Latin America, we have other countries that they haven't declared feminist foreign policies, but with a very strong gender equality perspective. So, and I don't think anyone have imposed these foreign policies on us. I also don't think that Latin American countries are against the developing countries or against the East or the West. We are not. We have our own foreign policies that are based on our particular principles. Also, if you think in terms of ownership, if you think today in terms of women movements around the world, probably Latin America is the region with the strongest women movements in the world. And it's my belief that the foreign policies that we have today are and in great percentage a result of their efforts. And today, when we talk about foreign policy, we also talk with women's movements. We are in debt towards the women movement in Latin America. So there is also, a bottom, continue to that question, a bottom approach. Women's movement are an integral part of how we understand feminist policies today from my region. It's not an imposition. We work with them, and we will continue to work quite closely because I think we share the same principles.
Thank you. I think Shirin Ebadi had a question exactly over there.
Thank you so much. Shirin from the Gender Center here. Thank you so much for a very interesting debate. And just for a change, as a feminist, I'll balance to ask my question to the colleagues who are in favor of the motion. So feminism fundamentally is about peace, inclusivity, anti-colonialism, dismantling patriarchy. And my question is, how can a feminist foreign policy be compatible with a lot of policies by countries who adopt feminist policies, who are, again, engaged in war, directly or indirectly, have development policies, migration policies, that is really fundamentally is going against the feminist values and needs to weigh the financial and the economical interest of a country. And I think my fear is that the feminist foreign policy is undermining feminism rather than strengthening it, and I would like to hear. And for a clear example, I would be very interested to hear, at the time when there is a feminist uprising in Iran, how has countries that they have had feminist foreign policy played an important role to bring about a change in that country and support feminist groups there?
Yes. Does it work? Yes. Thank you for the question. I agree with the premises that you said at the outset. Of course, a feminist foreign policy for us is just a continuation in our foreign policy of what we are doing at home or trying to do at home according, among other things, to the international obligation that we signed up to. CEDAW is a reality for many of us. It's the law of the land in many countries because they have ratified that. It's a question about also policy coherence inside a country and in the foreign policy of a country. So speaking from the Luxembourg perspective, first of all, I would like to add that also it was not imposed on one of the smallest countries in Europe. So it's not about size to decide that you want to have a foreign policy and the feminist foreign policy. But then also in how we go about it, I mean, we have a national strategy on women, peace and security. We have national action plans on the fight against discrimination against women in a broad approach. When we proudly implement our official development assistance, which is up to 1% of GDP, we do it not only with a strong view on the respect and the promotion of human rights, but then also more sectorally focused on empowering women and girls, because we know of their force and the potential that they can bring in the fight against hunger, poverty, and so on. So I think it's a lot about this coherence. Now, on a specific example, like the Iran example, of course we continue on the basis of these principles, on the basis of our feminist foreign policy. We continue with strong messages towards Iran. Well, it happens that at some moments official contacts are no longer what is the most effective. Still, up to these moments, all contacts and at all levels, be it through public and official channels, or be it in reinforcing also the civil society in a given country, are possible, and we are pursuing them on the basis of our feminist foreign policy. Thanks.
Can I add? Or no? Yeah.
You can add.
Okay.
Shortly, so we can take
Very shortly. So, two things. The first one is that I think having a feminist foreign policy doesn't mean that we're not going to have contradictions in our policies. It's the same thing that happens having a human rights foreign policy. We do have contradictions all the time. But the fact that we have a feminist foreign policy in place means that we have to give the fight to see it from a gender perspective. And that is new, because in our foreign ministries before, gender was not an issue at all. It was not a dimension that was considered as a foreign policy interest. And today, because we have a feminist foreign policy, it is. And that's a big change. And I think it's important to point that out.
Thank you. We still have time for a few more questions before we move to the final statements. There's some. I see two questions there, exactly 200. raised hands. I suggest we take 2 questions at the same time and then distribute it among the debaters.
Thank you very much. My name is Julia. I'm currently an intern with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, and my questions are also for the Against group. First of all, I do agree that it would be wonderful if all the women that are on the fringes, disabled women, lesbians, women of color, not an exhaustive list at all, could put everything that they want into this policy, but the women's rights movement has always had different streams and different opinions in every wave. Women have never fully agreed on what it is they want and what's the right way to achieve it. So why do you think if you put all these women with all these different experiences in one room, that they would actually come up with one policy that would suit them all? Because I would argue that that policy probably does not exist and that compromise is needed anyway. And why not have democratically elected people make that compromise? Secondly, why are we avoiding the word feminist foreign policy? Only because it triggers bigots. Like, what are we avoiding next? The words racist, gay, lesbian? I feel like... And also you said it's not the best vehicle that we currently have. Then what is the best vehicle that we have? Like, what is currently better and what would you propose? Thank you very much.
And taking the second question, yeah, thank you.
Hello and good evening. My name is Celine. I'm a student here at the Graduate Institute as well. I study economics. Thank you for the organizers for making this a debate, because I think that actually this brings out a lot of interesting things. And I've noticed in this debate that in fact the against side is almost reversing roles with the for side, in the sense that you are more ambitious and wanting to go beyond the sort of limiting feminist foreign policy. So that makes for an interesting dynamic. So my question here, originally I wanted to ask it to the against side, but I think this can be answered by both teams, in fact, is that to what degree do you see tensions between employing sort of a narrowed foreign policy targeted towards one vulnerable, one marginalized group with prioritizing others, as you have so eloquently elaborated, on LGBTQ, on disabled, on, you name it. So because a country has only limited resources, you may need to make some sacrifices. So where would you say are the tensions there, and when does pragmatism have to give for idealism? Thank you.
Who wanna start?
I'm happy to start. I think on the first question. I think, and this exactly, your question sort of really comes to the crux of the matter. I think this notion that everything needs to be decided centrally because it's easy. And because if you bring the people from different angle, it becomes difficult to come to a decision, so let's avoid that. And I think if we take that attitude, the change will not come. And I can tell you, there is a different way of looking at it. You talked about democratically elected representatives. But the democratically elected representatives don't exist only in the capital. They don't only exist in the national parliament. They also have democratically elected people in the local villages and communities and the municipalities. Suddenly, if you break down that very centralized way of thinking, or centralize one framework, to go and talk to each of those communities. I have worked most of my life in the field. I work for an organization which has 180,000 local units around the world. You will find wonderful solutions. Sometimes they need a bit of help. Sometimes they need a bit of learning from each other. But there is an amazing capacity to bring different ideas and different views and find solutions. Much cheaper, without compromise. I think that's why we have to get the diplomacy from the capitals to the communities. That's the challenge we have. And today's young people, please don't fall for that. Don't fall for that the solutions are only in the capital. No, they are not. They are in the villages, they are in the communities, they are people, they find the solutions every single day. So you are interning here in Geneva now. Next internship, go to the village, and you will learn something different.
And to maybe add on to that point, because I think it really is the core of our argument that because the women's movement, because the feminist movement around the world is so diverse, we need to move away from thinking we can have one unilateral, singular policy that can cover it all. That's just not how it can be. Instead, we need to embrace that diversity and that difference and make use of that and take the strength out of that and use it to our advantage, because only then can we actually address the root causes of systemic discrimination. That's the only way forward.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the questions. To the issue of taking it from bottom up. I mean, if in Luxembourg we have a feminist foreign policy now, it's not because diplomats or politicians invented it just like that. It's because there was a drive from bottom up to the civil society, obviously. Be it women's organizations, be it LGBTIQ+ initiatives. That's what drove it, through parliament even, and prompting also the decision makers on thinking about it and conceptualizing it as a policy. And in doing so, being coherent with themselves in the different sectoral departments of labor, of gender equality, whatnot, and education, social services, and so on. So that's to that point. The other point is, obviously, feminism has been a Western liberal idea some decades ago, but today, when we discuss with our colleagues from different countries who have a feminist foreign policy, what it is about, we fully take into account that today it includes the contributions, it must include the contributions of black women, women from the global south, LGBTIQ+ communities, in order to recognize the full and different experiences and perspectives of people as a matter of all genders and in all of their diversity. So does the against team go further than the pro team? I don't think so.
May I respond to that?
Real quickly, because then we need to move to the next phase.
I just want to very quickly disagree with the idea that feminism is a Western liberal concept that was invented a few decades ago, because I think if we look at history, then we can see that feminist movements are rooted in black feminism. They're rooted in feminist movements in the global south, as has been pointed out by the ambassador. They're rooted, for example, in Latin American movements. They're not stemming from Europe. In fact, that is, I think, one of the main issues we can see with this narrative about feminism, that it's European, white, Western. It is that are the voices of feminism that are the most pronounced. The other ones have been erased from history. So we need to fundamentally question that notion and finally admit that feminism is not a Western concept, but it is something that is deeply rooted in, for example, the matriarchal societies in African regions, in the Sahara region, for example.
Thank you. These playful exchanges are a perfect transition back to the last phase of the Oxford-style debate, where each side will have one person now offering a consolidated, hopefully, sum up and final argument of 4 minutes for each side, which will allow them to basically answer to all the arguments, repeat their main points, also take what was given here from the public, which was extremely valuable, and just wrap everything together. So first, I would like to give the floor for 4 minutes to you, Claudia, Fuentes, Julio, for the pro side.
These are my last 4 minutes?
These are your final 4 minutes for the pro team. You may give every ammunition you have left in the debate.
Thank you so much. Okay, so let's start with the issue related to history and whether or not this is a Western concept, which I think it has been among the most important topics, or whether the, feminist foreign policy has been only constructed from the north. Once again, I would like to say that as coming from Chile, and as I already mentioned, several Latin American countries have feminist foreign policy, I would argue this is a no-no. Also because historically speaking, and this is something that is very dear to my heart, feminists from Latin America have been at the forefront of constructing the international human rights regime, and in particular a struggle for women's rights. So let me mention just a few. So we have Berta Lutz from Brazil. She was also very pivotal in the UN Charter. We have Minerva Bernardino, very pivotal in the UN Charter and also in relationship to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And we have many others. In fact, already in 1920s in Latin America, the Inter-American Commission of Women was created. This was the first institution with the purpose of promoting women's rights. So my point here is that if we have a feminist foreign policy in place today in many countries in Latin America, it's because of the history. It's because we have inherited a history of a struggle of women that believed that they needed the international arena in order also to promote human rights domestically. So, and I think we are in debt to them, and it is because of them that feminist foreign policy today are a reality in Latin American countries. So that's one. Second, and let me stress once again about women's movements. This is not only, and I think that the ambassador also stressed that, this is not only something coming from governments that are so enlightened. No, this came originally, and we continue to do so, from very powerful women's movements that are the fuel of all our work in terms of feminism, of course, nationally and internationally. Third, what is going on today in terms of promoting women's rights? So I've been here in Geneva since June. And what has been impressed me the most is how in particular, countries from Latin America have been at the forefront of the struggle in terms of women's rights. So if you go to the Human Rights Council in June, you will see that the major resolutions in terms of gender promotion, SOGI, sexual orientation and gender identity, is promoted by 7 Latin American countries, some of them with a Latin American foreign policy. Critical, at the forefront of the debate. Second, today there is an important, and I think this is something that we should all worry about, a gender backlash. And countries with a with a feminist foreign policy, what we are doing today is actually working on a particular vocabulary, actually to be able, to fight back. We worry, my country, Chile, and many countries with a feminist foreign policy are worried that we are facing an important backlash. So declarations that before, were simple and were approved by consensus in the Council, today they're not. And we have to fight for every single word in order not to go backwards. We need feminist foreign policies for that. So we need, in order to sustain what we have and looking forward to our future. And this is precisely what we are doing, and countries from the global south and also from the global north. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your closing statement, as well as the extremely detailed and concrete examples that came with it. And now we are moving to the contrast side. Jagan, Chapagain, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Let me tell you a small story. It was last year. I came across a tweet. It was a tweet, and it caught my attention because the woman who tweeted came from Nepal, so I recognized the name. She had just married to an American man, and they decided to move to a country which has a feminist foreign policy in Europe. Let me not mention the name. And what she wrote, her experience of moving with her American husband to that country. And they are legally married couple. And it was a joint decision to move to that country. And what she wrote, and is publicly available in the tweet, that my American husband was treated as a respectful expatriate, and I am treated as an immigrant. That's the crux of the matter. If you want to have a feminist foreign policy, please look inside and treat that woman who came from Nepal with respect, as her white husband was treated with respect. So I think we need to change the narrative here. If you look at the gender inequality starts in the home. At least that's true in the part where I come from. It starts inside the home. It starts in the communities. And it becomes a national issue before it becomes a foreign policy issue. So we got to focus at home, at community, at local level. That's where the change comes. And that's the change that will be sustainable. So let me make a counter proposal to feminist foreign policy. Let's have a feminine education policy. Let's have a feminist economic policy that starts from the communities. That's what will bring the gender equality. And feminist foreign policy can help. I'm asking you not to scrap it, but it will not bring about the change that we are looking for. So, colleagues, we have to move to a feminist economic policy, feminist education policy, focus on the communities, move away from imposition to self-determination, be a genuine partner, supporter, enabler, not the one he imposes through a foreign policy means. I quoted earlier, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Now I can add, the road to heaven is paved with good actions. So let's move away from these nice fancy labels, nice slogans. Let's move into real actions by putting individuals' rights, by individuals' needs, by focusing at home, by focusing at communities, by focusing at nations, and we bring about the change that way. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much to all our debaters. You heard the pros side, you heard the contra side, you heard as well different arguments from the audience, from the debaters throughout the evening, and now has come the time to vote a second time. So you have again appearing exactly the Slido with another code, and you can again vote on the same motion. And we will see whether there's been a difference with the results we had first in the evening when we started. So, this is extremely suspenseful. Good, is it working for everybody? So I think a huge round of applause can go to start with to the against the House motion, because I think through your eloquence, I think through the convincing arguments, but also I think really the energy you put into really playing your role. I think there was really a clear, at least 20% of difference, I think, from the start when we started at above 70% for the pro side. Also, congrats for all the nice arguments, the nice catch lines as well brought by the pro side here on this side. You also have all the laurels of merit tonight. So, I would like to, again, congratulate our debaters. We have a winning side, but I think we all win tonight. More knowledge and a bit also more nuanced understanding actually of the implications of using some terms or some concepts such as feminist foreign policy. Now, just before we wrap up, I would like to just announce the recorded closing remarks by Sir Martin Jagan, who's the Secretary General of the IPU, the Inter-Parliamentary Union, as well as the chair of the International Gender Champions Global Board.
Dear fellow champions, dear guests, dear friends, as our 2023 Geneva Gender Debate draws to a close, I want to express my deepest gratitude to all of you for your presence and contributions today. It is inspiring to see the interest in this discussion in person and online on the evening of International Women's Day, as we chart the way towards realizing our vision of a gender-equal world. Today has been a powerful reminder that as we collectively reach for gender equality, it is crucial that we continue to have nuanced and constructive dialogue. We might have differing opinions when it comes to choosing the best vehicle for propelling us forward, but we share the same mission. Navigating both existing and emerging roadblocks on the path towards gender equality will require our ongoing willingness to engage, exchange, and empathize with each other. I encourage all of us to continue these actions and to elevate the voices of those who might not yet be heard, whether it be through advocacy, policy making, or individual actions. I want to thank our speakers and debaters who helped us all gain a deeper understanding of the issues at hand. A warm thank you to Darius Farman for your excellent moderation. And of course, a special thanks to the organizers of this event, our great partners at the Graduate Institute, and the team at the International Gender Champions Secretariat who have made this evening happen. Let us continue to push for more inclusive and equitable policies and practices in all areas of society, including in foreign relations, so that we can create a better world for all. Thank you very much.
With that, we are coming to the end of this event. We wish you again a wonderful International Women's Day and a great evening. Thanks again to all of you.